she called me and was like, Mom, I'm going to cry about this. She goes, thank you for making, it's crazy. I just had this conversation with her. She goes, thank you for making that hard decision. I know it was really hard to bring me home because you were going through so much. But she said, thank you for obeying God, because it has brought me to a place where I can now regulate my emotions. I know how to talk to the Holy Spirit and understand His Word in different ways. And I'm like, oh man.
We're so glad to have you all with us today. We have a couple who has written a book sharing their life story that I think is just a tremendous story about relying on God. And even in our pre-conversation, I'm already, I know, I'm already engaged and ready to go with this. So we are so pleased to bring you Chris and Julie Bennett. They are out of Malibu, California, which alone just blows my mind. Right. I love it. But they have written a book kind of chronicling the importance of family and belonging. And while it doesn't necessarily dive directly into our focus on Christian education, it definitely dives into our focus on taking risks and creating things through God that are best for our family. And so we thought this topic would be a nice, maybe a little bit of a deviation from what we normally do, but not really based on what I am hearing.
Because a great Christian family who made their own kind of professional and personal leap.
From Oklahoma, no less, out to California, which is, quite the jump.
Yeah, let's jump into it. Chris and Julie, welcome to Making the Leap.
Thank you for having us. So happy to be with you.
Thank you. It's such an honor.
Could we just start with a conversation that we were sort of having off the air before we started, which is sort of a fascinating story about how the two of you wound up in Malibu from Oklahoma. I mean, that doesn't even register with me how one winds up in Malibu of all places. That sounds very exclusive. So we'd love to hear your story.
Yes, I'll let Chris go here, but it was not as glamorous as it sounds, the whole story. It feels a little more glamorous now because of my view, but it was not so glamorous.
Yeah, I mean, it was about 6 years ago that we were pastoring a church in Norman, Oklahoma, and kind of from our vantage point, wherever we are, we want to be all there and all in, and we never had a vision of living necessarily anywhere beyond where we were. And over about a 4-month time frame, the spring of 2018, all that we could say is God began to speak to us, and it was through weird, crazy ways, like dreams and visions, and people would come to us that would have the same, basically, word they felt from God that was in a dream that I'd had. I mean, it was so many confirmations along the way. And I remember, I used to always tell our church in Oklahoma this phrase, it sounds really good in a sermon, but when you start trying to live it out, it's not as easy. But I used to always say, if God invites you into something, just say yes before you know how. And it got so loud and clear that God was inviting us to go on a journey, an adventure, which has been one of our core values as a family with our 4 kids. We were to uproot, that we were to move to Los Angeles, which we did in the fall of 18. We transitioned our church over. And we moved to LA without a home, without a job, without income, without savings or retirement. We tell people, do not try this at home unless you really feel that God has led you to do so. And so we made this big decision as a family. We brought our kids into that process as well, landed in LA and moved in with a family that we had met through some friends. And that's where the story got really, really crazy. As we got here, we were like, all right, we're where we're supposed to be. We knew that God was inviting us to kind of go into media and use media and entertainment as a platform to promote the message of family. And then that's where I think it got a little nuts.
You have how old are your 4 kids, if I could interrupt that part of the story?
20, almost 19 here in a few weeks, 15 and 13.
Oh, so they're in the thick of teenage years when you decided to do this too, which is not easy.
14 down to 8.
Yeah.
7, 8, it was 8.
Oh, my goodness.
So, I mean, to leave Oklahoma, go to L.A., that's a life change for kids that are well old enough to understand we're moving and making a big move.
Big move. And at that time, especially, in the context of this podcast, we had 2 in public school. 2 in public school. One was at home with me, and then one was in a private Christian school. They were spread out.
Say Christian school?
Christian.
That's okay.
It's a little different in Oklahoma.
It's all right.
Christian,
it's all right.
We say it different around here. No, sorry. Christians, followers of Jesus. No. So they were all spread out. We make this move, and I'll get back to the schooling in a little bit.
Sure.
So that was wild because they were really experiencing different things, and some of their processes in public, private, in their seasons of life looked so different, and we didn't know how hard it was for some of them until we moved, and we had come out of a really hard season in Oklahoma. So we thought we were going to rest for 6 months, live off the sale of our house. You made it sound a little dramatic, like no savings, no. I mean, we had a little cushion, but not much.
It
Sure.
doesn't take you very far in
No,
LA.
right.
No.
Exactly.
Right.
What you can buy a door handle for in Missouri, you can, you could, or like, well, oh yeah, in Malibu is what you could get a house
Yes.
for there. So
was
anyway, back to
the
the story. So we've Sorry, go ahead.
Well, no, just that I think I'm interested to know that you had felt this calling, and L.A. very specifically because you thought, well, that's the entertainment mecca, so that's where we should go. Am I understanding the motivation?
A lot of that motivation, the backstory was the summer of 2018. My oldest son, now he's 20, full-time tattoo artist here, and actually making big impact for Jesus. You never think I never thought my child would do that, or that would be a good idea, which is doing tattooing, which is another story for another time. But so my son at the time was invited to this Christian art school and got a full scholarship, and he needed a parent to be with him
In LA, yeah.
in LA. And so while we were here, that's when the Lord began to speak, through his word, all the different stories that Chris was sharing. Never in a million years do most people, pastors in Oklahoma, I'll word it that way, dream of coming to LA. No, that seems foolish, crazy. My parents have told me that California is going, to hell in a handbasket.
Yeah, that's Babylon, isn't it?
100,
For an
yeah.
Oklahoma
Right,
Christian.
exactly.
Yeah.
That's where you don't go. Christians should be fleeing.
You
And,
flee California, right?
Yeah, first of all, God is doing so much
Yeah,
here,
yeah.
which we don't have time to get into right
Sure.
in this moment. So I can stay on target with the story. But so it was the summer of 2018, by being in the ground, that was a part of connections and people's different ministry leaders that ended up how we got on the ground. So we had people we knew. We had a big connection on some media and a project that we began to work on. Not initially paid, but we began to work on in the risk. So we hit fall of 2018, and we were supposed to close on our house that had sold. We had already moved everything out. We had 8 suitcases, and there were 6 of us, and the people decided to back out on our house in Oklahoma last minute. So we found ourselves in LA with no home. And then I was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer just a few weeks in. So we had a big decision to make. Now everyone in Oklahoma that thought we were crazy really was like, see, we told you were crazy, you missed God, come back home.
We thought we were crazy.
We thought we were crazy. And that's why God knew they're going to have lots of confirmations to even go. And so I remember Chris and I having a moment where we looked at each other. We were crying. We were processing the news. I was supposed to start chemo based on what the doctor said immediately. And I hadn't been feeling well. I just didn't know that's what it was. And so we just thought we were tired, which we were, from ministry, lots of ministry.
Sure.
And may I interrupt on this point, because I know it's kind of personal, but given what I think I heard you say about your situation, does that mean no insurance either? I mean, you guys are kind of out adrift right now, and you've just been diagnosed with breast cancer.
Yes, that's a great question. Nobody's ever asked us that question. But yes, we thankfully were still on the church that we had left.
That sent us out.
Yeah, sent us out, and they were wonderful.
Oh, amen.
So
Okay.
we had 3 months insurance at that point. And
6 months.
then
we went
they
to Cobra.
extended it. Yeah, we
Okay.
had 6 months, and then we went on Cobra for a while, and
Which is not
We did
cheap
really
either.
good
Like,
care. No.
which is not Cobra was not cheap.
right,
but-
right.
Every
but
reason in the
it's
world,
insurance.
given everything you just said, every reason in the world to think this was a terrible mistake. I mean, that's just Satan
Terrible
pounded
mistake.
on you, right?
Yeah, and I remember a phone call
Yeah.
with a really close friend, like, "Hey, there's no judgment. Like, it's okay, just come back." Meaning, like, we were right.
Yeah.
And we looked at each other and had a moment. And of course, we asked all those questions. And I just thought, Lord, I know that we haven't made decisions. We're not trying to be foolish. We don't have anything to prove. We didn't mean, when we talk about even adventure and risk in our book, it wasn't about do something that seems so risky and foolish and cool. Like, none of that that was not the journey we were on. And it really was a moment for us. The week before we were about to move, Chris went early to start our oldest 2 kids in a Christian school here, which was another God story how they got there. But I was trying to get into the doctor. They need to do a mammogram ultrasound. I'm like, I'm sure it's nothing. They said, it's very bizarre. This is important to the story. It's really strange, ma'am. We can't seem to get you an appointment, and we can usually maneuver these things. And I said, you know what? It does seem a little odd. You can't seem to rush me in, but you think it's important. I'll just wait till I get to California. As soon as we move, I'll get it checked out. So now fast forward to we've gotten the biopsy results, and I knew that the Lord, we just were like, the Lord was speaking. I said, I didn't find I had cancer in Oklahoma because we would have never have come. I was supposed to find out here, and I really believe we're supposed to stay. And we made a decision. You know, when you think about the whole, like, you know, Joshua in the Bible, the whole book of Joshua, when it talks about the memorial stones that they put down, remembering who God was and what he had done, we had to look back on our life and go, we know that God brought us here, even though not everyone understood. And God has only proved faithful. We might not know what's ahead. We might not know the outcomes of things. But if we look at the memorial stones in our life and who God's been, he hasn't failed us. And so this is a really big place of trust for us.
And maybe I could say that
one
story real quick, and then we can move on. But basically, to your point, Chris, what you were saying is, you know, I think we have this romanticized idea of faith that, you know, if God said it, then it's going to be easy and doors are going to fling open. And the reality is, I mean, we see through scripture in our own lives that oftentimes we step out in faith and it actually gets tested. And whether that's the outside conditions of life, the hardness of life and all the things, or it's God just saying, will you take me at my word? And a month after we moved to LA, before the cancer, and we didn't even say, we ended up moving 20 times over a 6-month time frame. Once she started chemo all over LA, I got a text from a guy who I barely knew that's become a close friend since, but he messaged me September 2018 when we were still so excited and like, I know LA's hard for some people, it's going to be easy for us. And he said, hey, God woke me up at 4 a.m. With a word for you. And he goes, I tracked your number down. He said, I felt like God said it's your faith that led you to LA, but it's your trust that's going to keep you there. Because trust deals with the deepest conditions of the human heart, and that God's going to give you incremental clarity along the way so that you learn to trust him. And I remember reading that thinking, oh, that's nice, and put it in the notes in my phone. And when the wheels started to fall off, I can't tell you how many times I went back and revisited that and go, okay, every place that I didn't know I didn't trust God. I love God and we have faith in God, but it was a deeper thing of trust kind of being the undercurrent of faith.
I think there, like you said, there's probably a million different stories, right, to play into all this. And I know we don't have time for that. But based on what you just said about knowing you have to put the trust in, once you get there and you're dealing with all of this, you're looking for a house, you're trying, you know, you've got cancer diagnosis, but you still have kids, and you have kids that are young kids that are in massively like that formative
major
time,
yes.
Right? And we know this from our own personal experience. We all, you know, we didn't, not like you, but we did our own move, you know, from Kansas City out to Pennsylvania, back to Kansas City, and those kids were the part that I think made it the hardest. We felt certain, but we knew they didn't. And so you get out there and you've gone, your schooling situation, now your education situation has to become a little bit of a priority, I would think, even as you're dealing with medical. How did you look at that? You know, how did you look at that decision, or those decisions, I should say, probably multiple, while you're dealing with all of the other background going on? I think families need to hear that you can't just sit down at a table, make a list, and call it good. I think there's a lot that plays into it.
You guys have got high professional drama and health drama. At the same time, you have kids who have their own lives and concerns. And I don't know how you can give attention to all those things at one time. That must feel insane.
Yeah, there was a lot going on at one time, and before the move and the cancer diagnosis and the decision to stay, we also had that conversation that we were sitting down when we were in Oklahoma before the move, saying, "Hey guys, this is what we feel like the Lord's speaking." And although mom and dad are going to make this decision at the end of the day, you get to have a voice. Even if you're 7 or 8 years old, even if you're 14, you get to have a voice in your own way. And so we practiced that even before moving, and we spent time praying. We let the kids journal. We took a week where they were able to, like, this isn't like you need to say the right things to mom and dad so we feel better, or give us the right response because you don't want to disappoint us. Like, you get to take some time, then let's come back over dinner. We usually did around the table or in the living room. And now, what is it that you've been journaling? What is it that you're feeling? in your stage and season of life, which of course is going to be different from an 8-year-old to a 14-year-old. But I even think that works if your child's 5 years old. Like it may look different. They may be coloring a circle or a flower or an emotion on a piece of paper, but it's still the way they're giving a voice. And so each of our kids really, truly, I believe, had their own piece. That didn't mean they all wanted to move. One was super excited and like, get out of here, let's go. Because the season they're in, they had a really hard time at school. So all they could see in their not very developed brain was, it's going to be better because this is really hard right now in my life, which wasn't the case for them. But that's how they felt in the moment. So we had practiced that as a family and tried to do that, again, very imperfectly. We talk a lot about that in our book. We're practicing things very imperfectly.
Yes.
But we also, fast forward to now, we have been living with a family, and the money we thought we would have in 2 weeks, we do not have. And mom has a cancer diagnosis, needs to start chemo immediately. We have chosen to stay, and now we're sitting down as a family. Like you said, they found out some big news about mom, and they're going to stay. And I was homeschooling my younger 2 kids at the beginning, and my older 2 were in a Christian school in Burbank. And we did the same thing. We gave space for the kids to feel everything that they were feeling without masking it, like wanting to self-protect, because my tendency is, how can I control the situation for them to feel everything I want them to feel? And that never works. And so we had one kid that was extremely angry, really mad at God. We had one kid tell us, like, couldn't stop crying, as like, I'm never going to leave your side. I'm going to sleep at the end of your bed every night or on the floor. One's like, just promise me you won't die. Here's how I'm feeling. One is still, you just, the emotions all over. You guys get it. And out of giving that space, it almost seems too simple. But for the sake of time in this podcast, it's just that there was something really magical, whatever word you want to use, that just, you saw the presence of God in allowing kids to be where they're at, versus like, I would find myself wanting to, like, let me control your emotion by giving you the right scripture and saying, yes, but God says this and we should feel this way.
Right.
And I remember the Holy Spirit saying, no, I can handle just like I can handle your emotions and feeling them. I gave you those feelings to feel, but for them to not overtake you. And so practicing that as a family was a journey. So I don't know what you have to say on that. I mean, there's so much I could say.
Maybe one thing that was really helpful that we've done for years, we write about in the book, is every year, end of the year, we do a wonder wall, and we basically put up a piece of butcher paper and we write down, what are we believing God for this next year? But then we write down all the things that God did over the past year. And the littlest, it could be like, we got a golden doodle, which
they
happened
wanted one
during
for
COVID.
A long time.
But what we found is, like, to Julie's point earlier, is when you get that in your kids, just to remembering the goodness of God, so that when things do get hard, you have something to fall back on and remember that. That's been a really important practice for us as a family.
And that they knew that as we're going to stay, and then after that big conversation with all the feelings and the prayers and the tears, that's when we ended up moving 20 times over 6.5 months while I did chemo in the same 8 suitcases.
Jeez.
While when I couldn't get out of bed, Chris was driving our kids. We never knew where we were going to stay or live. Sometimes with a family that graciously opened their house, sometimes in an Airbnb, sometimes in a hotel. And so sometimes Chris was driving 2 to 3 hours to get the kids to school. Maybe we were 20 minutes away. We didn't know. And so that journey, and I ended up I was unable to continue homeschooling our 2 youngest. And so they ended up being in school, and they were but here, when God calls us to do something, even that, if it's never just mom and dad, our kids are always a part of that. And we wanted our kids to know it. This isn't just mom and dad chasing a dream. This is about our family. This is about the things. And we have seen, out of obedience to stay, when it was really difficult, we have watched our kids, from my oldest to my second born, who's now playing Division I football, living his dream, to some things that are happening with my younger 2 kids, like the things that we've watched God bring them into that I don't think that they would be doing otherwise. My son, in a really dark tattoo world sometimes, which I'm thinking, this is not God. I'm like, I am watching him lead others to the Lord. I am watching him thrive in God. And none of that would have happened or made sense if we stayed. So we were all a part of an obedience and a move, and they can see that now. And when it's been hard for our kids, again, memorial stones, or the Wonder Wall, or whatever it is that you do as a family, you're constantly remembering, which is what the Bible talks about so many times, because our kids will forget when it gets hard. Our kids will forget when they make a really bad decision. So,
and sometimes parents forget, right? I don't know how many times Chris and I have talked.
We forget,
right?
Yes.
You know, as over the years, like, man, we've got to remember it. Well, and specifically when we moved back from Philadelphia back to the Kansas City area, there was about I would say an 8-month period where we just kept thinking, what did we do? But we have to remember, he did this during this year. He did this at that point. He did this. And to share that, I think, also with our kids, and not, like you said, I think it's an important point. Don't discount your littlest. You know, don't just give validity to the ones that can eloquently speak, but give validity to all those.
Yeah, it's remarkable how, and we've really found that Satan attacks when you have made what you believe is a informed, prayerful decision to make the leap and change the dynamic in your family and for your kids. And it seems like that's when he just really comes in with a sucker punch.
Could I ask, how did you guys navigate that? I mean, a big move with your kids. What did that look like for you in terms of walking that out with them?
Well, it's funny. I don't think we were as conscious as you were about being. We gave them all a voice, for sure. We did do, as we started that process. And it's funny, we had one who was like, get me out of here.
Just
Let's
like you
go.
said. Yeah, he was ready to go.
And then he had probably the hardest time at first out, once we got out here. Wow. And now he's probably the one who is thriving. Solidly here, you know what I mean? So we've watched that transition. And I think that is one thing we've done, is continually remind our children, you didn't know this was all going to be happening in front. You didn't know this was going to be the path that you're on. And now we have, one of them who he's on his own, but he's talking to little kids as they're waiting for the bus stop as he heads to work about the cross around his neck that he wears, when probably that's not what people would envision when they looked at him a couple of years ago, as he was angry in his angry phase about being here, So I think it's that same idea of, of recognizing the good while understanding it's not going to be just awesome. We made this decision and we're good, and we're good. The hard comes.
Let me ask some pastoral advice, because I think what's so interesting is when you have kids, let's call it one out of the bunch, who's very, very unhappy, but you got to do it. How do you, in a loving way, say, we got to leave public school and we're going to put you in a private Christian school?
If that's the situation,
or
right.
we got to move and we're going to another part of the country. Obviously, they're the kid, you're the adult. You want them to have a voice, but it's not easy. So I think, this is more.
And they don't have an understanding of the finances. They don't have an understanding of the logistics. They might know small pieces, I think. So I'd love to, as a pastor, as a family who's very specifically focused on doing, things imperfectly, what would you say?
Wow.
Yeah, I'll share a story about when, I have a few I could share, but again, for the sake of time, I think there's one. So my daughter, our kids, I mentioned we had 2 in private school when we moved, 2 were homeschooled. We had to transition them. My youngest was in 2nd grade at the time, and it was mid-year, which was really difficult, mid-year.
Oh, gosh.
And then we moved to Malibu, and they're in a Christian school now in Thousand Oaks area in California. And my daughter had started after our move. Chris said, we would, and I will say to the story, which is going to be in the context of kids transitioning schools. I was in remission for a year, and then my cancer came back right when COVID hit with a vengeance.
Jeez.
So I was in the hardest fight of my life in 2020, 21, around there. And so we've just come out of COVID, mind you. Our kids are now back in school, in a brand new school, because we've moved from Burbank, California to Malibu. And now Chris is pastoring a church again, which is a world that's familiar to them. But again, they're like, okay, now we're back in this world. And my daughter spent the first semester in the middle school. She was in 6th grade, and my 3rd son was in 8th grade. And she seemed great. Like my son said, Joy is doing great at school. She's happy. Seems awesome. And we come to the first of the year, and I just started noticing like her not wanting to go to school. Kids have that all the time.
Sure.
And then I started noticing, hey, Brooks, is she doing well at school? Mom, she's great. But I had a daughter who is just a stellar human anyway. She's an amazing 13-year-old now. But Joy knew how to, and Joy would share this if she was on this podcast right now. She would share it very openly. She knew how to like put a smile on her face and do the right things and how to be as God would want her to be and act and all of those things. She had all the right stuff, but internally she was dying. Like she was battling with anxiety that she was actually repressing because she wanted to be a good student and do the right thing and, and transition well. And I found at the beginning of the year, so that she's gone one semester there, and one day she literally wouldn't get out of under the covers and get in the car. And I'm getting angry, like, we're going to be late. Get your rear out of bed. Like, I'm in the, like, now I'm mad and I really want to yell at you and I'm going to jerk you out of bed. Like that kind of moment. And so this happened a couple of days. And again, I could give all the details, but she started battling with anxiety, but I didn't see it. And it was really hard for me later because I always pick up on these things. But honestly, I was recovering. I'm in a new place. He's now pastoring. I'm barely holding on and barely recovering. And I feel like I've been run over by a truck, even though I was cancer free over a year at that point. It takes a long time to recover from 2 cancer battles. And so I had a moment going, I can't actually handle her because I can barely handle myself. And I'm sure some parents can relate to that. I can't even regulate some days. So how am I supposed to handle her dysregulation?
Right.
And so there was just a moment with the schooling and the kids and the transitions where, again, leaving out a lot of details and moments, I had a morning where it was so bad. And she's such a sweet kid. She's not an ornery kid. She's not even that stubborn. I was that kind of kid. And she's so sweet that I couldn't actually handle her not being sweet. And the Lord was really kind as I was spending time with him that morning. He said, if you don't pull her out of school immediately, what you're going to be unintentionally doing is putting a Band-Aid over something that's very deep and wounded. And it's going to speak to her in her lifetime that what she feels inside is not important. Now, that's not my intention. I am like, you can do hard things. I'm praying for her. Here's a verse for the day. Let's go tackle the day because I need my space at home. I can't homeschool you. And that's when the obedience is. And so we pulled her, and she had just made the basketball team. And I'm like, we finished what we started. So we're going to finish basketball, and then you can come home. And the Lord said, no, you're going to pull her now.
Wow.
And I'm so glad that we made that. And, of course, we're making decisions together when I'm saying me. But, I'm obviously having a little bit more conversations with Joy in that season of her life. And so we prayed and we did it immediately. And it's the best thing that we ever did. And everything in me was like, no, it's not right to pull her out now. Let's just get her some help. Like, I'll just get her the counselor at school. We'll talk together about all that she's been through. And she was dealing with separation anxiety. If I was a minute late for school, she was like, something's happened with Mom, which came from a traumatic memory. Back 2 years prior when I almost died in the middle of COVID and nobody could be with me. And they couldn't even get a hold of the hospital, which is another story, not for this podcast. But when we started to undo that, she had so much trauma from that. It was manifesting. It was PTSD that was manifesting in separation anxiety, and she couldn't function well in school. But apart from that decision, I watched the last year homeschooling her. Even though I'm really good at recess and I'm not great at subjects, which is fine. She's doing great, guys. She's doing great. And she's going back to school now because God gave her 2 dreams. 2 dreams. And I kind of blew them off like, we're going to homeschool 1 more year. And she said, Mom, it's time for me to go back. And so she is at camp right now. She's about to go back to school. And she called me and was like, Mom, I'm going to cry about this. She goes, thank you for making... It's crazy. I just had this conversation with her. She goes, thank you for making that hard decision. I know it was really hard to bring me home because you were going through so much. But she said, thank you for obeying God because it has brought me to a place where I can now regulate my emotions. I know how to talk to the Holy Spirit and understand his word in different ways. And I'm like, oh man, it's hard not to make it things about us. as parents. And it is important for parents to care for their own needs. That is not the point of the story, any means. But it's really fun. She's so excited to go back to her. And they're an amazing Christian school, and we're thankful for where they're at. So
I think that is something that I would say we focus on and we talk about episode after episode is listening and knowing you have to be obedient even when it's hard. And to me, it doesn't matter whether it's a public school or a Christian school or a homeschool, and you're turning around and you're like, this is what I'm being told to do. Even if I think this is right and I believe it's right and we've prayed about it already, why am I having to do it again? I think that's a really important message, because we sit in these places of, oh, we just made this move. We just beat this cancer. We just made this decision. And then you have to revamp that a little. And I think as parents, sometimes we want to sit back and rest in the decision we've made. And we get frustrated that we have to make another decision or we don't understand why we have to make another decision or another move or another switch. And I think that is something that as parents, I believe they're wrestling with. I think most parents wrestle with that a lot. And the basketball team story, I mean, that's hard, right? Because your kid's excited about something, but yet they're not happy and they need something more, and it's going to require more from you or more from us as parents. And that is the crux of what we talk about all the time with this with this podcast. And so I didn't know we were going to go down that path with this interview today, but I'm so glad.
Well, I agree, because the consistent theme in all of these things is nothing has to stay stagnant. If you're really listening to him, you can act, and you must. And so often I think we just ignore it. Pastor, we're just inclined to say, nah, that can't be what I'm hearing, or no, that can't be what my daughter's feeling, or, well, she doesn't know what she wants, she's a kid and we're adults, and let's just write it out. That's typically what we do, right?
Yeah, and I think we want to make a formula about things. So it's like, well, 3 years ago, God told me to move my kid to public school, and you're saying that you did this, or now he's asking me to do this.
Yeah.
Like in my cancer journey, there was a moment where I feel like God said, do not do radiation. And I chose not to do it the first time. And I might have gone, well, I missed it if I did this. And God's like, no, it's about learning to follow me when it doesn't always make sense. But when we look back, we go, oh, I see. It took me 5 years to see that clearly, but now I do. And it's been that way with our kids. There's not been a formula. There's the Word of God. There is, the Father walking us through making the decisions. And so many times as we're seeking him, I think anytime we ask God, we're praying or we're asking God a question, and our eyes are fixed on him, and there's that purity in our hearts, just say, we want to know, then going with your gut, right? That phrase is going to probably lead you to a great place, because God's like, you've asked me, your intuition is driving that because your eyes are fixed on me. And sometimes it's scary, and sometimes he's not just writing it in the sky, but there's not been a formula for everything. And that's really important for us to remember, that it's looked very different. If we tried to do one thing for our kids that we did in one season the same, it wouldn't go well. We have to reevaluate every time.
There was a hymn yesterday in church. I had not heard it before, but I jotted down the lyric. I don't know what you're doing, but I know what you've done. I'm fighting a battle you've already won. I hadn't heard that before, but I absolutely loved it. Maybe you've heard it.
That's so good.
I jotted it down. I'd like to frame it on my wall.
Right, and I think that's the point of all these conversations. And probably, I would say, we haven't talked a ton about your book, but I would guess that's probably what it's about. That your book called Fighting for Family.
If this isn't in your book, then you've got another book you need to get cranking on, by the way.
But I think that's piece of it, right? Like that's what your book is for, is the idea that God knows where you're at and where you're going, but not every family is comfortable with that or knows that or wants to get to that place and they don't know how. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about your book and a little bit about the kind of the promptings behind it. I know, again, we are limited for podcasts based on, for time, but I'm curious because just the few things you've talked about, leading imperfectly or, being imperfect within parenting. If God invites you in, just say yes. I think there are a lot of families out there who could benefit from what you've talked about.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, even the title, Fighting for Family, we live in a time where people have learned how to fight with their family, and not how to fight for it. And from a spiritual standpoint, one of our favorite verses is in Psalm 68. It says, God places the lonely in families. And not every person is married, and not every person has their own children. And yet, we see in the life of Jesus that he, in some senses, elevated spiritual family above natural family. When they brought his mother and brother, said, your mother and your brother are here. He said, my mother and brother are those that do my will. And I think the encouragement for me is to go, you may come from a broken family. You may have not have a great, call it nuclear family or whatever that may be, but there's still the possibility for family right where you are. And so like the tagline of the book is the relentless pursuit of building belonging. And the best way we could say belonging is that space where you can bring your full self and be fully loved and accepted as you are where you are. And so as we were writing this book, it was so interesting because then, COVID hits and you see the isolation. And with the isolation, you see the increase of depression, suicide goes up. You've got like the UK and Japan that hire a minister of loneliness. And so this idea that, wow, we can be around people and still feel really lonely. And, sociologists are now saying we're the loneliest, most divided generation that's ever lived. The U.S. Surgeon General puts out this 85-page document as we're writing the book, and the title was Our Epidemic of Loneliness and Isolation. And so I think the thing we have fought so hard for is, even in our marriage, and we don't even have time to go into that, we have so much brokenness that we walk through. I mean, deep pain and betrayal. And, today's our 24-year anniversary. And we're standing here going, we had to fight for the marriage that we have. And we're in a time where I think people throw in the towel so quickly. And of course, there's reasons for ending relationships that are justified and whatnot. But even with our kids, we've had to fight for relationship with them, for people that God put in our lives. And even in now pastoring a church, we're trying to build a sense of family and fight for the sake of relationships. And so because everyone has pain and family's messy, we wrote this book to really go, all right, no matter where you've been, what you've been through, we're better together than we are alone. Isolation just perpetuates our own pain. And so we do hit on a lot of these themes of the importance of forgiveness and healthy boundaries. How do you know when you should stay in a relationship? How do you know when you need to step out of a relationship?
Not marriages, just relationships in general. Sorry, I just wanted to clarify that.
Well, I have to say that this subject in particular, I'm so glad that we're talking, because if there was one thing, and the reason we're back in Missouri is because of COVID in the Philadelphia area. We got out. We saw suicides and desperation. Our church closed for over a year. You guys know that all too well in California. We had to go. I mean, because I felt a spiritual darkness in our community, like it was profound. And one of the voices from hell that I remember was when you would hear celebrities on Zoom calls being broadcast saying "alone together." Do you remember that phrase, "alone together"?
Yes.
They literally came up with that as a marketing phrrise. We're all in this together, alone, isolate together. I mean, you had celebrities on TV saying that. Pastor, what you just said, it haunts me, and I believe to this day, culturally, we're dealing with that.
The after effects of it more than we even recognize.
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
Yes, 100%.
We had a guy, our church is very family-oriented, very community-based, and we do, as best job as we can to kind of create that space for people. But we had a guy in our church married with a son in our church, an older guy, retired guy that I knew very well, showed up at church every week, served faithfully, had a lot of people around him that loved him, but he battled with depression and isolation. He would talk about it, and I got a call from his son 3 months ago, and his son was weeping, saying, my dad just took his own life. And you're going, how did this happen? And I remember talking to this gentleman the week before he took his life, having no idea he was suicidal. And I just remember his words. He said, I said, how are you doing? I put my hands on his shoulders, and he said, I'm not doing great. And I said, we love you. You're so valuable to us. And he said, I just don't want to be a burden. And I just remember looking at him and I said, you are not a burden. But it's like such a lie of the enemy, because we know that. You hit on it, Chris. Like, the enemy works in isolation. If he could find any way through bitterness and unforgiveness and trauma and pain to divide us and isolate us, that's where we become a sitting target.
And
so
here you go, Pastor. On that point, here's me now. I'm so profoundly aware of that. I'm now angry about it. I'm viciously angry at what was done to us collectively, and I'm still battling that, which is its own kind of darkness, by the way.
Right.
But I think the way that we
it's
counter
real.
that
It's
is
real.
then going, okay, if that's the spirit that's coming, then we come in an opposing spirit and go, then we're going to find ways to bring people together.
Yeah.
And so we started doing these things called fam-to-table dinners, because you could even go back to the 1950s, before the invention of the television. The table was the centerpiece of the home. It was the place of connection and vulnerability. And once the TV came out, then TV dinners got invented, and then families started gathering around the TV instead of the table. And you can see the outcome of that now. And so we've had to fight for home. We've had to fight for the table. And we've tried to create pockets now where what Jesus did was he invited strangers from all backgrounds, all walks of life, and he would have a meal with them. And there's something that is equalized around the table. So I think to your point is I think we've all felt that, and then going, well, what do we do about it? I think the way we counteract that spirit is actually to help create spaces of belonging.
Yeah, I mean, people wanted to leave everything, repent of their sins and follow him because he was willing to go, we're not going to be alone, and I'm actually not going to leave anyone out. I'm not going to ever deviate from truth.
Yeah.
Right.
Never deviated from truth,
Right.
which is not what we're saying in
it's
any
different.
way, shape, or form.
Yes.
Just to be clear on all of this, like belonging and everyone's welcome. It's not about deviating from truth. It's about Jesus was able to sit with the outcasts and the sinners and gather them and be fully God, fully man, and full of truth. And it's like, this is better.
Yes.
Everything else that I'm in the start is better. And COVID and our culture is so, the enemy is so using it to as if isolation's a cool thing. As if that's what we got to do, but we're together. To the very thing you said, Chris. I mean, it's true. I feel that. I feel your anger. I feel that is such a, and so it's like, well, even with, you've got election coming up. You had the vaccine. What election?
Yeah.
Where are we?
Yeah.
You have so much coming up that we still have our values and our opinions. I'm not talking about that, and I'm not here to make a political statement. I'm just saying in general, it could be church culture. It could be anything. It could be it could be the people that homeschool against the people who are kids are in public school. It could be a million things, and it's not that we don't have we're obeying God, we are walking in truth. But if we get to the place where we're even isolating in that context without being able to listen and love so that the light of God can come, then I think there's parts we're still staying stagnant also.
Boy, I have to
100%.
remember that. So you've helped me on this show. It's our show, and you've helped me. So thank you so much.
And now you've given
us.
us, we know what we're talking about tonight around our dinner table now, for sure.
Well, and these things, we've had so many
Get rid of
discussions about these phones.
I was just going, I don't have time to start talking about the phone.
But they're mini TVs. I mean, you invent the TV dinner. Now we've got TVs in our pockets, and we're all holding them ourselves.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's right.
Anyway.
So,
Fighting for family. Chris and Julie Bennett, we are I have been so blessed by this conversation. I know we've been working on it for a while, and I think it was designed to be here and today right now for this moment.
Well, I feel like I want to invite myself only because I've never been to Malibu, and I don't know anybody in Malibu,
right?
so now I feel
Now
like
we know. Now we know.
All right.
Missouri to Malibu, bring it.
I can't wait. I can
I know.
say we're going to see our friends at Malibu. It sounds
find a
so
way.
that's right.
cool. But this is an incredible book. I hope everybody buys it because you've been through the ringer, and for people that make hard decisions for their families and need the encouragement, and I think a lot of families do. Boy, this is it.
And I'm hearing too, everything you're saying, I get annoyed when I hear people talk about family concepts as applicable only to elementary or toddler or baby age. I feel like what you're talking about but is relevant whether your kids are 25, 35, 45, or 5 years old. I think this is something, these topics and these ideas are important. So I would encourage all families reach out, look on. I know you can find it on Amazon. I don't know if there are other places you can find it as well.
Anywhere
Anywhere
books are sold, you can
Perfect.
find it. And again, it's our story, yes, and it's our vulnerability, but it's also tools and tips. And I think anybody, can pick up this book. Whether you know Jesus or whether you not, it's going to point to him, but families for everyone.
So fightingforfamily.org, Fighting for Family by Chris and Julie Bennett. Chris and Julie, we thank you again so very much for taking your time and sharing
It's so easy to
with
talk
us.
to you guys.
Well, let's do another one of these days. I think there's more to say.
We would love it. And Chris, I mean, nobody has a better voice for podcast and TV than you. I was like, this is epic. It's so great.
Would you read the Bible to me every day?
New job.
Thank you guys very much.
Thank you, guys.
All right.
Bye.
Bless you.
And that'll do it for this week's edition of Making the Leap. I hope you'll check it out wherever you listen to podcasts, wherever you stream, wherever you watch. Just subscribe so you never miss an episode, and we'll see you next time on Making the Leap.
Making the Leap is a podcast presentation courtesy of the Herzog Foundation. We'd love your feedback by rating us and commenting on the show.
And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time on Making the Leap.